Welcome to the place of rest, where our aim is to give you language that helps you displace the growing confusion, chaos, and dis-ease of our times. In today's episode, Virginia and guest Jenna Wright discuss the profound intersection of home environment and physiological health, revealing how reclaiming internal liberty from generational trauma is the essential path to displacing chaos with rest. We hope you enjoy today's conversation.
Jenna, thanks for joining me today.
So happy to be here.
I know, I'm so excited. We have such a long history, and I want you to give our listening audience a little bit of a recap because we just finished an entire month talking about the mission of R.E.S.T, putting it in context of what's happening politically and governmentally. I always say political discourse is always downstream from governmental discourse. Government is direction, regulation, control, and restraint, and it always starts with the individual. So it's futile to discuss political dogma and ideas without peeling back the layers of what is government, where does it begin, and how do we show up for conversations without attacking and disparaging each other. We spent a lot of time talking about that last month, but this month we're talking about the illustration of R.E.S.T. If the mission of R.E.S.T is ultimately freedom and helping people understand that without liberty you can't have freedom, it's the seed of a thing and the fruit of a thing. You can't understand the fruit without grasping the seed. We can't plant lemons and expect avocados. So the seed of a thing and the fruit of a thing becomes really important. But now I want to talk about those big ideas that we discussed last month in the context of how does this show up in our life? So for the first, we talked about last week, the life of the heart, the role of relationships, the meaning of pictures, and the value of story. Those are the four quadrants that we discuss. Why? Because the life of our heart doesn't just begin at home, but it begins in the home of our parents. So there's complex generational things that make up really the essence, the anatomy of who we are, the physiology of who we are, and inform spiritually who we are in our convictions and a number of other things. So the life of the heart, it begins in our home. I want you to give context for that discussion within the framework of your own story. Because when you came to see me, you were very, 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 very sick. And it's been many years ago now. But I know R.E.S.T has been transformative in your life. But I want you to explain to people the framework of not just the home you grew up in, but the home that your parents came from. It occurred to me just before you got on to do this episode with me. In this episode, we're going to discuss specifically how the terrain of our spirit, our soul, and our body developed in the landscape of our home, which is another form of terrain, if you will. And I'm exceptionally thankful to have you join me today.
Yeah, so I grew up in a family, beautiful family. We got fragmented when I was 6 or 7. And my parents divorced. But prior to that, my mom came over from Vietnam. So when she was about 5 or 6, and she was adopted by an American soldier. She came over to the States. And when she came over, she was then abused and had a really challenging childhood, adolescence, really had to fend for herself. During this was pre-Vietnam War. So she got adopted right before the war. And so her mom was 15, 16 when she had her. And she thought,
so there was a lot of confusion, chaos, and disease around that time. So she was conceived in a time of great peril.
Exactly. Yes. So her mother thought, I'm doing the best that I possibly can for my child. And I would like to give my child a better future, a better life. And so she thought, okay, I'm going to have this American soldier adopt my daughter. So little did she know that when the soldier brought my mom home, there was a lot of rampant abuse. And so a home that starts with abuse does not leave the child. It ends up in the body. And so that carried on throughout generations. So that carried on to our generation. So my dad had a not so similar story. There was a lot that generation. There wasn't a lot of emotional communication and there was no attachment theory. There was none of that at that time. And so my mom and dad got together and they were married for about 10 years. By the time they had the three of us, they were on the brink of a divorce. And so that kind of went out about 6 years or so. And then by the time, I was 6, the household was just in shambles. And so I didn't know how to communicate at that time what was going on inside of me. And so I ended up really just releasing and pulling my hair out and just very chaotic. It was a very chaotic time.
Jenna, thank you for giving us a brief summary. There are so many big narratives in that explanation that are relevant, but for the sake of time, basically spiritually, psychologically, and physically, every aspect of the terrain in your sweet little body was in a state of chaos. And it was a reflection of very much what was happening in the home. So the life of your heart was really conflicted, and you didn't know what to do with all these conflicting narratives. And what you said is absolutely right. And we see that here every day, that the trauma from our experiences that we inherit and those that we have manifest for sure in our body, and our bodies carry that trauma. So Jenna, tell us how you manage that, because we know that the home is where we're supposed to be taught to direct, regulate, control, and restrain our spirit, our soul, our body, our choices, our decisions, all these things. But when home is chaotic, internally we're chaotic, we really develop without having the skills to know how to do any of it, because there's no respite, there's no peace. So everything around you is in chaos, like spinning plates. How did that show up in the rest of your life? Take us to how that showed up from 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They did this, they did that.
So by the time I was 6, 7, 8, things had become chaotic. My family was divorcing. I didn't know up from down. And I started to store everything in my body, and I didn't know how to release. So finally, at some point, there is an implosion, and I had to release. And so that's when I started pulling out my hair. So take that and just bring that into adolescence. Instead of actually communicating, instead of, sharing what was going on in my heart, we didn't have that family dynamic. So then I started to abuse alcohol, drugs. I started sleeping around. A lot of that was that was all very superficial to what was going on internally, just the chaos that was happening internally. So by the time I was, in my 20s, repeat that cycle, multiple abortions, alcohol, drug addiction, all these things, then my body started to break down. And so when there's internal chaos in your terrain, so in your spirit, soul, and body, then eventually things, your body starts presenting with symptoms and signals. And signals are not bad. It's just saying, hey, there's something that needs to be tended to. So the garden of my spirit, soul, and body needed to be tended to. And essentially in my 20s, as I was just drinking, partying, living a lifestyle that was not conducive to health, by the time I got into my early 30s, my body started to break down. And so that's when I realized, okay, something's not right. Something is not right.
Yeah, I like how you explained it, because you can see if all the plates are spinning within your own constitution, there's a communication breakdown. So there's a bioenergetic, there's a biochemical, and there's a biospiritual manifestation that is just destructive, because we're supposed to operate with each system independently dependent on the other. Just like a family, by the way, mom, dad, child, right? We're all supposed to operate independently dependent on each other. So when the spirit, the soul, the body, the physiology, the constitution of a person can't, there's generally an indication that the home isn't operating independent. And if it didn't start in that home, there's some generational root to the chaos that we see in homes. So talk a little bit about when we met and how you came to me.
Yeah. So by the time that we met, I had been sick for years, and I'd been going to doctor to figure out what is wrong with me. And I think that therein lies part of the problem, is what is wrong with me, instead of being curious about, hey, what's actually going on in my heart? What is my body trying to express? What is it trying to say? And so I had, I'd gone down the conventional route. I'd gone down the alternative route. I'd seen multiple doctors. And so I had been diagnosed with specific diseases. So Hashimoto's and Lyme disease and all of these labels.
And secondary infections, right? Secondary infections. It was a mess. I remember thinking, wow, the whole thing was collapsing.
Lyme, co-infections, parasites, all of it. I went down that whole rabbit hole trying to, cleanse and detoxify and basically kind of biohack my way out of illness, but you can't biohack your way out of illness. And so when I got to you, I was about to spend, I can't even remember how much money, but another couple $1,000s, 20,000, 30,000, I'm not sure, on another clinic. And I had already spent my life savings. This has been going on for years. And so when I got introduced to you, I was on the brink of honestly, a psychological, a meltdown. I was completely,
scary.
It was, I didn't know up from down. I could not make decisions. I spiritually felt completely demonized. And then from a psychological standpoint, I was mentally unwell, which you saw and you experienced. And so we had
Never forget it. I'll never forget it.
Powerful time. And it really started with the role of the home. You were asking me questions about my mom and about my family. And it really started to spark the curiosity, and the questioning started to spark something inside of me. And I started to release. I started to cry. And I hadn't allowed myself to emote for a long time. There was a lot of anger, but there was so much pent up shame and fear and false narratives and lies that I was believing about myself and about my story and about my family. And so you helped to tease some of those things out.
Yeah, it just occurred to me while you were speaking that our image, our identity, and our purpose, which we talked about last week, in the context of what we do, how we do, and what the mission of R.E.S.T is, it just occurred to me that really the framework of all those things that make us us, they're supposed to be defined, refined, and perhaps maybe perfected or understood, perhaps better understood in the comfort and in the safety of our homes. But our story so expands beyond the parameters and the framework of just that home that it's almost impossible to help people get traction by just talking about mom, dad, the relationships and the communication systems in the home. As you all know, the work of Dr. Hammer, Dr. Reiki Hammer, the German, the French, and all the integrated and the tapestry of research that we use here to guide and inform what the constitution of each unique individual we work with is very complicated, but it's very informative. And that's where we get really, I don't know, that's the launching pad to rest, is really showing up with a lot of curiosity about many of these narratives that people don't want to even talk about or think about. But I saw how the terrain in your body became so corrupted. It was so corrupted. It was violent, actually. And it was assaulting your entire immune system. There was an imbalance of power.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we talk about the terrain of the spirit, soul, and body, when we start with, I didn't really understand principles of self-government. That wasn't a framework I had been taught. And so when I came to R.E.S.T and you started teaching about self-governance and what that actually looks like. And we'll talk
And
more
it
about
begins in
that.
the home, right? Really,
It
it
does.
begins in the home for us and in the home of our parents. That's why understanding these narratives becomes really important, because we're carrying these stories we don't understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think as, you taught a lot about self-governance, I realized that, biologically we are to govern as well, biological governance. I was not actually operating in that, because if we think about how the institution of, let's say, family and medicine and government structures are set up, we are told
every sphere of influence, has a governing body.
right. We are told what to think and not how to think. And so by the time I saw you, I was told what to think my whole life. I was not told or taught how to think. And so I was giving away, power and authority, because I was not operating from a place of, curiosity and wonder. And essentially, when you stop asking questions and you stop staying curious, then you're going to be blown by the wind. And that's kind of where I was at by the time I got to see you. And so the terrain of my body had been honestly infected. It had been infected.
The terrain, yeah.
The terrain of my body, the terrain of my mind, the terrain of my spirit, all of those things had been incepted, I would
Yes.
say. It was incepted. My mind, there was no renewing of the mind. I didn't even know what that was. I had treated my body like a trash can, honestly, for years, just putting anything in it. I mean, whether it's food or alcohol or promiscuity, whatever that was, it's like I was just intaking things that were causing chaos and destruction.
That's not freedom, is it?
It is not freedom.
No, it's
And
death. It's a culture of death.
It is. And so then as we're sitting there and as you're mentoring me and I'm getting to learn all these things, these new principles and ideas, I'm realizing, oh, wow, I didn't ask a lot of questions growing up. I wasn't really curious. There wasn't a lot of wonder. And so my body suffered, my mind suffered, my spirit suffered. And I will say, learning about holistic healthcare and alternative medicine, which I hate the term alternative, but learning about true health, you start to break down some of these ideas that we've been taught for years, for centuries, honestly, about the body.
Deconstruct. Yeah, you needed to deconstruct, yeah.
Yeah. And so I started to actually deconstruct the things I had been taught in, school about nutrition and the body and the biochemical model that we're so taught in allopathic medicine. And it's not to say to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's just to expand on and realize that was incomplete. And so learning more about the terrain of the body, which I know we'll get to, and the terrain of the spirit and the terrain of the mind was what really helped lead me into more freedom.
I love it because it's all in the context of the terrain of the home. And I think at this juncture, I want to remind our listening audience that we are triune beings made in the image of a personal, intimate, caring, loving God. And we know because we bear his image. So we can be we can take great confidence in the knowledge that we have everything we need to heal ourselves, each other, spheres of influence, and structures of authority. But not if we lose sovereignty. Not if we don't understand our sovereignty. Not if we don't understand that we are independently dependent on each other because we're wonderfully, fearfully, and uniquely made. A fingerprint bears witness of that fact. So are there these laws that Jenna referenced that create a framework from which we reason? We just happen to have a data-driven, evidence-based program that supports these things. We're not just saying, I didn't just roll out of bed and come up with this stuff, right? Rest is the science of healing. It's the science of freedom, the science of sovereignty.
We hope listening to this episode has brought you closer to experiencing the freedom of wholeness and healing. If you have questions or comments about today's episode, or for updates about REST, please visit our Instagram or Facebook at The Place of Rest. If you would like more information about Virginia, or to support and join the cause of REST, please go to theplaceofrest.com/donate or call 949-289-5935. Thank you for listening to Rest with Virginia Dixon. We'll see you next week.